I wouldn't normally photograph from this angle, but since we're doing 1984 today and showing how he was capturing the spirit of the Communist Manifesto in places, this kind of, to do O'Brien, the character in here, this is appropriate. This is appropriate, as well as Marx and Engels. This will make you think that 1984 is not a real novel, but sort of a philosophy text. But it is a real novel. I've recorded the novel parts, though, and what I want to do today is record the conversation between O'Brien and Winston, in which George Orwell comes. It isn't noticed that Orwell puts forth his own philosophy here in Winston's mouth. They always quote what O'Brien, the bad guy who is torturing Winston, says. What O'Brien says as if it were Orwell's opinion of what the future is. And then the anger and the violence of O'Brien's opinions seems, where did Orwell get this? Well, we know this was written in 1946, or appeared in 1946. We know that Orwell had experienced the Russian communism, Stalinist communism, going back to when he volunteered to fight on the communist side in the Spanish Civil War, and he wasn't the right kind of communist, too idealistic or something, and the Stalinists were out to kill him when they did a purge of people who had come to fight. He managed to escape, though, with the help of his wife. But the amount of anger and violence, where does he get that? Is he just making this up in order that O'Brien sounds like a bad guy? And then, sadly and oddly enough, as I'm recording this in 2023, a great deal of this has entered American political culture. Everyone comments on it. Instead of respectfully discussing things, you demonize everyone. But Orwell, they said, wow, Orwell predicted all this. Those school board meetings in which 5 stiff-faced people sit and tell the parents that their children are none of their business. And we think, wow, how did Orwell know this? Well, we know he got it from Soviet Russia. But Soviet Russia, this was orthodox communism, including the tone, going back to the 1840s when this was written. But let's do O'Brien first. O'Brien, Ray, is a person who is, there are 3 units in, 3 classes in 1984. There is the inner party, the outer party, and then the proletariat, who are just called the proles. In China today, Mao hadn't taken over China. Jaifeng was in 1949. This book had appeared before that, but it went according to the Soviet model. In China today, the Communist Party is only 5% of the country, and it's very difficult to get into it. And a great deal of what people say about China is just the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese people have no more control over it than the people in Little Italy have over the mafia. You just keep your mouth shut and try to stay out of the way. So, O'Brien, so Orwell calls all those people in 1984, which takes place in the future when he wrote this, 1984, takes place in a place where what is called English socialism, Ingsoc, has taken over. And that inner group is called the inner party. And of course, the proles are just the hoi polloi, the people who have no part in anything, just get ordered around in the vast majority of the population. But there's a middle group, which he calls the outer party. And they would be you and me, the people in the universities, the educated middle class, who don't have any power and who get ordered around by the inner party. And O'Brien is the inner party. Winston Smith and Julia are in the outer party. And then there are the vast proles. And the way things work, you may have noticed already in your life, you would watch one of these talk shows in which some girl comes out and says, you know, I'm a hoe, Jerry. I smoke dope every day, and this is a white girl, but she likes to talk black, like Bad Baby. She made millions doing this after she was on that show. I don't care what nobody says. I hate my mother and I beat my mother. And you think, my God, she says, I'm a hoe and I smoke dope every day. And here I am. If I said to a woman at work, gee, your hair smells nice, which actually was the name of a shampoo at one point, I believe. Gee, your hair smells nice. Oh, I would have to go to a Saturday re-education class that I objectified her or something. The outer party has all these incredible rules, all these don'ts that they're not allowed to do. Whereas the proles, as someone says in this, the proles and the animals are free. Nobody bothers with them at all. They just do whatever the hell they want. Mostly it's gambling and fornicating, and nobody bothers with them. They're the people that the communists called the lumpen proletariat, and said some very bad things about them too. The inner party gets to do not exactly anything it wants, but it has a great deal, the Russian nomenclatura, the big shots, had their private dachas, they had cars with chauffeurs. The Communist Party today had, when we would go, since my wife's relatives, big communists, we would stay in hotels which had started as, just as, not rest houses, as dorms for visiting comrades from Beijing. But over the years, they grew into posh hotels because there was no private hotel system. And the Internal Revenue System now operated a whole string of luxury hotels in which, during the real communist days when we started going there, a beautiful girl in a uniform stood outside the hotel, and as you approached, she hit the button for you, asked you what floor, and pushed the button. And whenever my relative, who had general's rank in the civil service, visited a place, there were these enormous banquets given for us with 40 dishes characteristic of the area, all of them involving potatoes, because this is what the area specialized in. And I remember my brother-in-law saying, serve the people, huh? But it was all right, because they were very happy to see us. We knew the procedure after a while. If Beijing was coming, you had a fund. You had your own travel agency. You had a fund. Everybody, like a snow day in New York, everybody got off from work. And an enormous banquet was given for the 4 or 5 people that had come out, this family that had come out from Beijing into some religious area, for instance, that I wanted to know about for my work. And we would sit there, And we'd have a banquet like this at each meal. And we would taste it and thank everybody and compliment the food, and then we'd go. I left my hat behind once, and when I walked back in, everybody who worked in the office had already sat down in our seats and was eating this feast and taking home. They had this budget for us, but actually it was all for them. So they were very happy to see us, and we were very happy to see everybody getting the feast. And then they had their travel agent that sort of who got the day off to take us around to the religious sites that I wanted to see in the area. But that's the inner party. That's how the inner party lives. The proles in those days, I remember the great triumph that we saw, because we'd been so many times, when instead of wooden houses that let the wind blow through, we saw the prole houses being replaced by cement houses, cement bricks, which would have been warmer in the winter and wind and rain wouldn't go through. The Chinese Communist Party did get something like 500 million people out of poverty and into the middle class by converting away from communism, which Deng Xiaoping wittily called capitalism socialism with Chinese characteristics. Okay, but now Xi Jinping has made it socialism with Russian characteristics, and it's fitting that he went to see Putin. So it was good while it lasted. Anyway, O'Brien is from the inner party, and Winston Smith, when he discovers evidence, too complicated to explain here, thinks that Brian is also someone who hates Big Brother. And he tells O'Brien about it. And O'Brien talks with him, and eventually O'Brien has him arrested and tortured. What Winston Smith has done so wrong, you'll discover when you do read the book, it's a real novel, is he and Julia have had an affair. Because they're both single, but even so, because, as Julia says, the party has to make sex illegal because it dams down all those impulses. She says all this marching around and flag waving is just sex gone sour. You have to dam down one of the human needs in order to bring it out as a soldier or a party bureaucrat. The parties turn against sex. And we see even in the United States that the Generation Z has been taught to regard sex not as something that a man and woman do together, but as something a man does to a woman. And in general, like a hostile act. And unless he has a signed contract that this is permitted, it's wrong. It's like a permissible evil. All of the comedians used to be able to make the sexy jokes. It's all canceled. It's a sad situation, but as they say in this book, it turns against, when people, as Julia says, Julia's a wonderful character, when people are satisfied and happy, they don't want to go out and march around and wave banners. They can't let you be happy. For political correctness, the basic sin is happiness. You must never be happy. You must always be guilty. You must always be getting in touch with your privilege, as the phrase now is. And it's astonishing, they think, of how this all resurfaced again. And this is one of the main speeches. But remember, O'Brien really believes in this whole system. And even as he tortures Winston, he speaks to him in a fatherly way. He's a school teacher in his manners. And this system has been very appealing to professors and school teachers. Why does it keep appearing? This system is the only system in which intellectuals hold the whip hand, rise to the top. No one would ever vote for us. But if we manage to get on the top through mind control, intellectuals can rule. The normal way is that soldiers and later financiers and inventors would rule. But we, the school teachers, the real intellectuals, wanted to run everything, and this is how we get on top. So, it starts here. O'Brien is having the discussion. A faint smile twitched the corners of O'Brien's mouth as he looked down at Winston. I do O'Brien more or less as he's indicated to be a professor with sort of more of a northern accent, not a really posh accent. I told you, Winston, he said, that metaphysics is not your strong point. He's a brilliant man. But you are mistaken. You're trying to think of solipsism. This is not solipsism. This is a digression. The real power, the power we have to fight for night and day, is not power over things, but over men. He paused, and for a moment assumed again his air of a schoolmaster questioning a promising pupil. How does one man assert his power over another, Winston? Winston thought. By making him suffer, he said. Exactly. By making him suffer. Obedience is not enough. Unless he is suffering, how can you be sure that he is obeying your will and not his own? You see, there's so many excellent philosophic things get put in here. How would you know that you have power over someone? If you tell him, have some ice cream, eat ice cream, and he eats the ice cream is delicious. How would you know he's obeying you and not just enjoying the ice cream? You know he's obeying you if you tell him to do something he hates. If you tell him to do something which makes him suffer. After you masturbate, whip yourself. You know you have, there you are. It was quite common in Victorian England for people, for a certain group of many Christians, after masturbating, to whip themselves. We know that the Prime Minister Gladstone did it because he faithfully recorded it in his diaries. And every time he would record the masturbation, and then he'd put like a star or something to mean he whipped himself. He had a little symbol. And this was not unusual. Now, if you told him masturbate, and he did, how would you know you had power? He wanted to anyway. But if you tell him whip yourself, and he suffers the pain, then you know you have power. Now, of course, the Marquis de Sade would say, what if he enjoys the pain? But that gets too tricky. In general, you know you have power if you can make people do something that they don't want to do. In class, I would usually tell the class to stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. And I'd say, see, you didn't want to do that. I just made you do it because it's fun for me to watch, and I experience my power. The sensation of power itself is wonderful. This is what O'Brien's saying. He said all previous dictatorships claimed they were doing it for something else. They were doing it for the glory of God, or they were doing it for the proletariat. We're doing it for the joy of power. Everybody always was, but we're honest. Now, he's one step beyond the communists at that point, because they're still supposedly doing it for the sake of the proletariat, the proles. I need a little bit of tea. Any questions or comments at this point?
No, it's my first time hearing all of this. Fascinating.
Well, I gave you that preface because one of the mistakes people make is thinking that 1984 isn't a real novel. It's just a lot of philosophy. It's not. The center of it is the love affair between Julia and Winston, which is beautiful and moving. And it's juxtaposed to the tyranny in which they live. All right. So he says, power is inflicting pain and humiliation. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. You begin to see then what kind of world we are creating. It is the exact opposite of the stupid hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. A world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will not grow less but will grow more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress towards more pain. The old civilizations claimed that they were founded on love and justice. Ours is founded upon hatred. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy, everything. Now, at this point, when we read this in the old days, I didn't even have flags on it originally. It was too far out of there. Now, he'd seen the Soviet Union, and he'd also been kind of a communist at one point and read this stuff. But now we hear it in the world around us. That, for instance, Ibram X. Kendi, his book about being anti-racist, it is not enough. You must not be colorblind. You must not say, I love people as individuals. Individualism is wrong. It is only classes against classes. And if you're not fighting, you're familiar with Ibram X. Kendi? You've heard the name?
Kennedy.
Kendi. He is probably the most prominent political philosopher at the moment, the one most assigned, the one most discussed, and his motto is that unless you're fighting racism, you're a racist. You're either with us or against us, but it must be fighting. The idea is you never had a black best friend. The black people around you are not your friends, and it's just the opposite of Christianity or Judaism or Islam even, but there is no friendship. It is a world of fear, of hatred, of everybody fighting everybody else. You hear this increasingly, this tone. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy. Everything. Already we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, between man and man, between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. Chris Rock didn't read this, but Chris Rock, in his latest big special on Netflix, talks about that world. He says, everybody's full of shit. Said, you see a friend now, and you say, I was back in the neighborhood, and I saw, I forget what the guy's name was, Ken. And I said, hey, Ken, how you doing? He said, I got a job. I said, where'd you get the job? Oh, he names this big company. So how you like it? And he said, I love it. It's an excellent job. I feel safe there. It is a safe space. And what I love about it is that it is diverse. And Chris Rock says, listen, he goes, Ken, it's me, Chris. You know, you don't have to say this. Everybody talks like that now. What do you think? I'm wearing a wire? This is what he means about there will. But he said he knew we have cut the links between child and parents, between man and man, between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. It stops friendship. People are so, you don't make jokes at committee meetings anymore. I went through my old lectures about 2 years ago as I saw all this developing. I crossed out the jokes. In a joke, you'll say something you don't really believe. But someone could say that someone who got an F could say they'd been terrified by this or whatever. There's all these mechanisms for that now. But it's been done on purpose to break the ties between people. The whole society is based on the idea that we're all enemies. It goes on. We shall destroy everything. We're breaking down every habit of thought. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future, there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. See, that's what was dangerous about there. When two people are in love, they form a little bond against the state. They don't want her to be sent off to fight. They want to stay together when they have a family. In this book, in this world, 1984, the children have been severed from the parents, and they have, instead of Boy Scouts, they have a little organization, a little big organization called the Spies, in which the children are rewarded for turning in their parents. And that's, but you already heard something that you know. We have cut the links between child and parent. The battles going on in the school board meetings are people who, over the years, knew what they were doing and who infiltrated and who are trying to become your new parents. You are no longer the parents. A woman yesterday, I believe, I think she's a Democratic representative, said all the children of Michigan or wherever it is are my children. And you hear this kind of thing, but it isn't said in a loving way. In fact, there are videos out there of this and that teacher. You might have seen some of them bragging, I'm taking them away from their parents. And I'm teaching them things that they keep secret from their parents. And this is all in writing. This isn't an interpretation. It's important so that the old values don't get transmitted to take the children away from the parents. Now, this kind of world of anger and violence comes straight from the main document as far as influence, the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Now, they wrote many, many volumes, but this was the one that made their name and which has been used as the basic thing. This is, it came out in 1848, I think. Yes, 1848. This is the edition from 1948, and this is the most popular edition. Have you ever read this in school?
No. I just feel like if people heard the word communist, they just go nuts.
Really? Well, they better go nuts privately because their professors are all into this. Now, they're talking about, listen to it's the tone. They start, but they end by saying, the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their aims can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. Force, violence. You say, all right, well, maybe they were standing up for the workers who were exploited at that time. It goes way beyond that. It goes to this. And listen to it. Remember, they published this. The selfish misconception, they're addressing the reader, that induces you to transform. No, let's see. Don't need that. Okay, let's just cut to the trade. With exclamation points. Abolition of the family, exclamation point. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. This state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. That refers to some things in the preceding chapters. But here we are. Do you charge us with wanting to stop, it sounds like O'Brien, do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you will say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social education. They're frightened of what's being taught in the family, which at this time would be heavily Christian, individualist, loving each other and that sort of thing. Your education. Is not that also social? It's determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention of society, direct or indirect, by means of schools. The communists have not invented, so you're either with us or against us. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. How? By rescuing the children from the parents. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed, that means holy, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, and that's all dismissed as bourgeois claptrap, becomes all the more disgusting the more as, etc. But that tone, the bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the woman. All the women will be held in common. There will be no husbands or wives. this was called free love at one point. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women, that is, women held in common, but you stop and say to yourself, do you want to stop and support some of this? I mean, the bourgeois claptrap about the family, and again, the technique is not to offer any evidence, just garbage, nonsense. Phobia is one of the famous words. That's racist, that's sexist. Anybody who disagrees with them is against them. And since they are on the right side, you're on the wrong side. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting. Since when? Since when? But you notice, that's O'Brien also. It's a world entirely of hate. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. What? Since who? Give me. What about all the romantic novels and it? No. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common. That is, everybody is cheating on everybody else. Well, I don't know. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. And here are the measures which must be undertaken. 1. Abolition of property in land, application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax for anybody who manages to earn money anyway. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels, anybody who runs away. 5. Centralization of credit. The state becomes the only bank. 6. The state owns all the factories and instruments of production. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. That's right up here. But we know now what they mean by education. We don't have to interpret it. There's talk about it, severing the bond. And that tone of fury, that tone of Ibram X. Kendi really, or even Marx, instead of you're either with us or against us, they're really saying you're either with us or you're against me. They represent everything. But that tone, that's where Orwell gets it from. O'Brien talks like the Communist Manifesto. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth as one takes eggs from a hen. There will be no laughter except the laugh of triumph over a defeated enemy. No comedy is illegal. There will be no art, no literature, no science. When we are omnipotent, we'll have no more need of science. There'll be no distinction between beauty and the Russians accomplished this. There will be no curiosity, no employment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston. Here's what you get instead. Always, there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing, constantly growing subtler. Always, and this is one of the most famous things in the book, at every moment, there'll be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. That's one of the most famous statements in here. And they act as if Orwell believed, no, it's O'Brien. What Winston says in contradiction, and this is where we'll end today, I don't want to, you're already over time, but Winston has recovered himself, and all he can say is, "You can't," he said weakly. "What do you mean by that remark, Winston?" You could not create such a world as you have just described. It's a dream. It's impossible." "Why?" "It is impossible to found a civilization on fear and hatred and cruelty. It would never endure." "Why not?" "It would have no vitality. It would disintegrate. It would commit suicide." "Nonsense. You're under the impression that hatred is more exhausting than love. Why should it be? And if it were, what difference would that make? Suppose we chose to wear ourselves out faster. What difference would it make? Can you not understand that the death of the individual is not death? The party is immortal." And he says, "I don't know, I don't care. Somehow you will fail. Something will defeat you. Life will defeat you." "We control life, Winston, at all its levels. You are imagining that there is something called human nature, which will be outraged by what we do and will turn against us." Now here is O'Brien's big mistake. This was Stalin's big mistake. This was Mao's big mistake. That you could create what was called the new socialist man, who was not interested in family, just only for himself, not interested in anything, only lived to conquer. And there are entire books written about this by them. Men, that there's no such thing as human nature. And what Orwell, if you read his essays and his other books, believes is there is. And it involves love. Men, he says, are infinitely malleable. Malleable is a word that comes from malleus, hammer. Men can be hammered into shape. Or perhaps you've returned to your old idea that proletarians will arise and overthrow us. Put it out of your mind. They're helpless like the animals. Humanity is the party. The others are outside, irrelevant. Winston says, "I don't care. In the end, they will beat you. Sooner or later, they will see you for what you are, and then they will tear you to pieces." Do you see any evidence that this is happening? Or any evidence why it should? No. I believe it. I know that you will fail. There is something in the universe, I don't know, some spirit, some principle that you will never overcome. And what has happened in all of the countries that tried this? It all falls apart. We saw it. The Great Cultural Revolution really tried to do this. And China ground to a stop, to a standstill. You probably have relatives who were in concentration camps like my wife was for 8 years. And the only thing that saved China was Deng Xiaoping brought in free choice. Didn't last. China, there's something wrong there. However, there is such a thing as human nature. There is something in the universe you'll never overcome. Do you believe in God, Winston? No. Then what is it, this principle that will defeat us? I don't know. The spirit of man? This was written before the Soviet Union collapsed. This was written before China came into being and had to go through the same process from beginning, middle, and an end. I was a socialist. Socialism always seems to make sense. So that's why it's so easy to convince young people to be socialists. After all, which would be superior? An army which is just a mob with pitchforks, or an organized army with generals, with experts, with people doing their jobs, with people in control, the experts? Well, why not apply that principle to society? Why should a bunch of goddamn businessmen be running things? We're the experts, we professors. Put us in control, and we'll give you your ideal state. I call this sometimes Lisaism. Do you know The Simpsons? Lisa Simpson, what will she grow up to be? A professor. Lisa, in one of the classic episodes, tells a friend, she finally has a friend, about her dream, which is there'll be a society which I call equalia, in which, and she says, in which everybody will be equal, only I'm in charge. Everyone will be equal, only I'm in charge. It will be like a giant kindergarten, and only she's in charge. And there are pictures on the internet of Lisa with her queen's robes and all this. But you see, it doesn't make sense. Why should that ragtag army, it wouldn't work in a war. And the reason it wouldn't work is that, as Mills says, everybody has seen something that the other people haven't seen. Freedom of choice of ideas is what saves crazy capitalism. It looks crazy, but it's freedom of choice of ideas. It's endless experiment. The woman sees something. Everyone is either a man or a woman, an ancient or a modern, active or meditative. And when it's just Lisa doing what she would like, telling everyone do that, and getting no input, Lisa, who has never had a fist fight in her life, telling the army how to act, it eventually falls apart. The great lesson was 1989, when Russia and China came to us on their knees, waving a white flag, saying, we made a mistake. It doesn't work. The two rulers of the Soviet Union went on American TV, and one of them said it had to be tried, and then Gorbachev said, I am a communist. It had to be tried. It didn't work. And Yeltsin said, I'm sorry it was tried in Russia, though. And that was it. The communists and the people who don't believe there's such a thing as human nature have no rear view mirror, Ray. Because they always talk about theory, that's the great word, because they can't talk about experience. All of this has been, in the 1840s, nothing had been tried. There was only one capitalist city in the world, and that was London. But by now, it's been tried in every culture in the world. It's been tried in China and in Germany and everywhere, and it always leads to the same disaster. And neurosis is trying the thing that didn't work before and thinking it will have a different outcome. All right. This is unfortunately a very philosophic introduction to 1984. It is a tremendous book because it is a real novel, yet it includes all this. But the horrible thing is so much of it seems to be coming true again. Lisa's great error is not realizing everything would be perfect if I were in charge. Everyone would be equal. It would just be by my class. But I would be in charge. I'll leave you with that thought. Think about it. Don't say no right away. Okay, very good.